Hey guys, today we're looking at the 5500X3D versus the 5700X3D in Escape from Tarkov. Right now, the 5700X3D is a bit of a weird one. It's no longer being produced along with the 58 or the 5600X3D, and prices have gone up quite a bit for these. You're looking at around 300 to 350 on the used market, depending on where you are. On the other hand, the 5500X3D is available online for about $180, and with deals or coupons you can usually get it closer to around $150, with DDR5 prices being astronomical right now and DDR4 still being a lot more affordable. AM4 is actually becoming a really attractive option again. So what I wanted to find out was how much performance are you really giving up with the 5500X3D, and is it still a viable option for Tarkov? Here are the specs for the configurations I used for testing. Both CPUs were tested on the same configuration. I'm using a Gigabyte X570 Aorus Master motherboard with 64 gigs of DDR4 running at 3600 CL16. Not that the RAM speed really matters much in this setup for this game, but I push it up anyways. For storage, I've got an Orico O7000 Gen 4 M2 NVMe drive, and graphics are handled by a Zotac 5090 Solid to keep things as CPU bound as possible. In terms of tuning, both CPUs were running the same settings, a -30 undervolt using PBO curve optimizer. The F clock, U clock, and M clock are synced at 1 to 1 to 1. SMT is disabled and resizable bar is enabled. If you want to see my full tuning setup for all 5000X3D chips, including the two that were tested here, check out my X3D tuning guide linked in the upper right hand and in the description below. For in-game settings, I'm using my Pure 70 settings, which is my optimized high texture preset. Everything was tested on Streets of Tarkov, running my usual route from Klimov Street into Lexos. It's basically the most demanding route in the most demanding map in the game. I ran this route 3 times on each CPU in offline mode first to get baseline numbers, and then online in live rates to get real world numbers. Then I use those averages for comparison. Just keep in mind these numbers are going to be a little lower than what you'd probably see in a typical raid running around the map, and that's completely normal. This is basically the worst case scenario, and I'm using this area by design to highlight CPU differences as clearly as possible. Alright, looking at the numbers, starting at 1080 offline, we've got 82 FPS average on the 5700X3D versus 77 on the 5500X3D. That's about a 6.5% lead, and the gap between the 1% and 0.1% lows are higher at around 8%. Moving up to 1440, the numbers and gap don't really change. You're still seeing about a 6 to 7% difference in averages and very similar differences in lows. And this is where Tarkov behaves differently compared to most games. Even though you're increasing resolution, you're not really becoming GPU bound here. Your CPU and RAM really determine your FPS ceiling, and the GPU just determines what resolution and settings you can play in to reach that ceiling. At 4K offline, we see the same trend continue. 5700X3D is still about 6 to 7% ahead, with around a 6% lead in lows. A lot of times in 4K, you'll see CPUs kind of even off because at that resolution, you're usually GPU bound, but Tarkov is so CPU bound that that's not the case here. Moving on to online raids at 1080, the numbers shift slightly. The average FPS difference drops to around 5 to 6%, but the lows are clearly still in favor of the 5700X3D with about a 7% lead on the 1% lows and over 6% on the 0.1% lows. When I look at the average active cores, it never exceeds 6, so I don't know if it's the extra cores working in the background or the faster clocks that makes a difference here, because they have the same cache size. At 1440 online, things tighten up a bit more. The average difference drops closer to around 4% and the lows are a bit closer as well. But even here, the 5700X3D maintains a small edge in consistency. And finally, in 4K online, this is where the gap is at its smallest overall. We're looking at roughly a 3% difference in averages with slightly larger gaps in the lows, but nothing really major. So overall, the 5700X3D is consistently ahead across every scenario, usually in that 5 to 7% range, with the biggest difference showing up in the lows. And the key thing to understand here is that in Tarkov, the gap doesn't disappear at higher resolutions because your CPU and RAM are still setting the performance ceiling. So if you're looking at building a budget gaming PC or upgrading an older system, and you're wondering how big the gap really is between the 5700X3D and the 5500X3D, it's more or less about a 5% difference overall. And and it's pretty small considering the price gap and the fact that it's actually being manufactured right now. For anyone wondering if the 5500 X3D is worth it in 2026, I think it's a really solid option, especially right now with DDR5 prices being absolutely insane. For the cost, the 5500 X3D gives you really strong gaming performance, and more importantly, it lets you stay on DDR4, which is still significantly cheaper than DDR5. That was really the goal with this comparison, to see how much you're actually giving up compared to the 5700 X3D, and in my testing, it's not much. I think it gets interesting if you start looking at the total platform cost. As of April 2026, I was able to find a used B550 and 64 gigs of DDR4 for around $300. Pair that with the 5500 X3D at around $150. And we're at about roughly $450 total for CPU, RAM, and motherboard. Meanwhile, a 32 gigabyte DDR5 kit alone can cost up to $450 right now. So that's even before you factor in a new CPU and motherboard. So you can see how this becomes a really attractive option for a lot of people, especially in the current market. And on top of that, AM4 has been around for so long, there are still a lot of people out there who can just upgrade to a 5500 X3D, drop it in without rebuilding their entire system. Really good stuff from AMD. Alright guys, that's all I've got for this one. I hope it was helpful. If this helped you make a buying decision on a 5500 X3D and you're looking for one, please consider using the affiliate link down below, as it really does help support the channel. There should also be a coupon code there to bring the price down a little bit. In the next comparison, I'm going to put the 5500 X3D against some other current budget options and see how it fares. So don't forget to like and sub so you don't miss that video. As always, thanks for watching. See you in the next one.